Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to talk about something you guys have probably seen all over the internet for quite a while now, and that is this guy. The Ziss Bubble Moving Media Filter, or the Ziss, Bubble Bio, I believe is the other name we have here. I had to read the package because I forgot. So, probably most commonly you guys have heard of this filter through Aquarium Co-op, which they are kind of the first one to really bring this in mass to the United States. And it's got a lot of positives, but it's also got a couple negatives. So, before we dive into what's going on, let's check out what's inside the box. Okay, so when we open the box up, I have a second filter here. We have these kind of major components. We have the filter itself and its housing. You can remove the top. It takes a little bit of work. It's just a pressure fit, so if you just slowly wiggle it back and forth while pulling it up, it will come off. But when you get inside, you can kind of see it's just your standard kind of K1, and I'll pour some out, columnist style media, right? Nothing too special, though quite a lot of it. And then, other than the cap, you have on the back here, you've got 4 suction cup holders, and then your air line, which is going to move down to the bottom. And if we go to the bottom of this filter, we put this cap back on. I don't want it all to spill out while we look at this. If we go to the bottom of the filter, there you go. It's a very easy twist and pull off to access the sponge that's sitting inside here. And then you'll notice, you really can't remove this, but there's the hard bracket where it comes in to get your airflow going up into the moving bed chamber. Now if we set this down, you can see, I'll pull the sponge out. One, it's not very thick. It's only a little bit, I would say, thicker than a hockey puck and about similar diameter. But it is kind of coarse. So it's not going to plug up very easy, but at the same time, this is not going to strain a lot of particulates out of the water. So let's talk about one of the biggest negatives I have with this filter. And Corey has mentioned this, so it's not like it's something that's being hidden. If you feed a lot of fine foods, you're going to have a lot of particulates in your water, and you're looking for like crystal clear water or very clear water moving off of air, this will not filter those particulates out. And because you're a moving bed on top of that, in the filter itself, you're not going to see really good particulate filtration. What you are going to get is really good biologic capacity. So you're going to build all that good beneficial bacteria in the moving media, and because it's continuously moving, it'll stay young and active and very healthy, which means it consumes the most of our waste, ammonia and nitrite, but doesn't filter particulates out. However, that being said, this thing is really, really good at dealing with ammonia and nitrite. So to top it off, the kind of last things you have, you get a teeny tiny air tube, and they show this on the package. If you connect this tiny air tube here, that's going to come out. They do include a kind of regulator valve to deal with flow rate. So we've got that right here. Right, it's a pretty typical screw down valve. So where this does matter is using this into here. Right, so you're going to put that valve into that airline they supply, and then you'll hook it to your standard airline. That's really the only reason this is included. This is a type of airline that I am not a big fan of. It's the more rubbery kind instead of like the clear vinyl type. I have a ton of my own airlines, so I personally don't use this, but this is exactly what it's for, is to just set up that restrictor valve. That's kind of a con at the same time, and I'll explain in just a sec. And then finally you have 4 suction cups. They're a pretty standard clear suction cup. What I will say is when you have all 4 of them in here, and it's pretty simple, you just put one in and slide to the outside and it locks in. Nice and simple. Pretty standard on these things nowadays. When you have all 4, this thing is going nowhere. This adheres really well once you get the suction cups in place, and it's not moving. And that can be a problem because it can actually be really hard if you need to move it in a tank to move with all 4 suction cups in place. So that's kind of everything that comes in the kit. Let's kick back up to my face and we'll talk more about this filter. So is this thing any good? I'm sure that's what most people are thinking. You've babbled about what's in the box. You said there's a negative. You said there's a huge biocapacity. That's a positive. Is it good? Should I buy it? I have 3 of these things now, and 2 which obviously aren't in use. And that's because I'm going to do some interesting tests with these, because I want to see if I change this media out, does this become way better? So here's what I would say. There's certain negatives about this filter. Number 1, if you're that person who is very minimalist or you have a small tank, this thing is a really big piece of plastic sitting inside of your tank. And a lot of people cannot stand that. So for those of you who really don't even like the size of most sponge filters, you probably weren't looking at this thing in the first place. Now, if you want something that has a little bit better biocapacity and you're not worried about particulates in the water, or maybe you have filter feeders so you definitely don't care about it, like some of the wood shrimp or the bamboo shrimp, the big filter feeder type shrimps, these things would be amazing because their biocapacity is extremely high compared to a standard sponge, and they leave all those particulates in the water so your filter feeders can get to them. Now, if you want super clear water, even replacing, we have tried, I think Robert at the co-op store, the manager, has tried replacing this pad with much finer floss, and it might be somebody else. We were talking about it, so forgive me if I'm forgetting. This was like 2 months ago when I fielded my kind of initial one major gripe about this thing. And that didn't really change it very much. It got a little better, but you had to pull this thing apart basically once a week and empty it. Now, I mentioned how we have this little valve here and how I want to talk about this in a second. Yeah? Haha! Sorry. I had to do it. It's the YouTube thing, right? So here's my thing. These, in order to go really well, have to have extremely high airflow. The problem is when you look inside the canister, right, all this columnist media, for it to properly cycle through, as I mess with my camera like crazy with my hand, it needs a lot of airflow. So if you're restricting that valve down at all, you are probably not getting enough airflow to maximize what this filter is supposed to do. With that being said, because you need so much airflow, and this thing, the little outlet here, I want to get it to focus. This outlet is not like a jet lifter. It's just kind of the gaps where it naturally goes along this sweep here and just comes immediately right out the top. So what that leads you to have is that if your water level isn't like right here, I mean literally right in the middle of this grate, this filter can be extremely loud. Now, if you don't care about the sound of air-powered filters, like you're somebody like me who use a lot of sponge filters in several of your tanks, and that just like bubbling noise doesn't bother you at all, you won't care about this at all. But if you're trying to have this fish tank near a TV or anywhere else where you don't want it super loud, you either A, have to always have your water level like right here, right in the middle of the grates, or this thing's probably not the best solution. Now, I think there's a fix for that, but it would require some work on this head here to turn it into a proper jet lifter and kind of slow that pace of bubble down and scatter it a little more. I think it comes out too concentrated. But, that being said, if you don't care, the biocapacity on this thing is really nuts compared to a sponge. It's very easy to clean because all you're doing, right, again, I keep putting it down, then I have to pick it back up. You're just quick unscrew. You can literally, look how far I have to turn. Let me get it focused. There we go. Lock, unlock. So watch my finger for reference. Lock, unlock. That's it. And then you easily can just pull this off, pull out that little sponge, and this can still be running in your tank while you quickly clean the sponge out, reassemble it, and you're good to go. It's fast. Fast is great. Is it worth it? I think now that the price has gone down, they used to be, I think, $29.99 at the co-op, and now they're $24.99. I think it's not a bad price, but for me personally, because I tend to prefer less particulates in the water, I would not switch out all of my sponges for Ziss filters. But I'm also willing to run more sponge filters in a tank in order to get that higher biocapacity. If I was limited on the number of air taps I had, say I was using just standard air pumps instead of some of the much larger like linear air pistons or some of the super pumps that are out there, then I would actually be looking at these filters because I don't need as much, outlets for air and as much air pushing around. I only need one, and this thing is going to reliably handle a good sized tank. Like, I think you could easily do just a 40 breeder with this because the biocapacity is right. Now, if you stock that thing really, really heavily, you'd probably need two. But at the co-op, they have nothing but 20 gallons, and they're filled with tons of fish because they're for display for sale, and they don't have biocapacity issues at all, right? So you'll see a tank that has 40, 50, 60 tetras in it, and that filter is just cranking away and doesn't care. It also gives pretty good water flow. Because it needs that high air, the amount of turnover in your tank is actually pretty good. So this is another major positive for this filter. The downside to that is, because you have so much more water flow happening, your evaporation rate is going to be a little faster, right? Because that churning at the top of your water is going to cause more evaporative cooling. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that your tank water is going to be colder and you've got to pump your heater higher or something like that, but more just because you have that extra movement from a little bit higher air and you don't have a way to diffuse the bubbles down. So in a sponge filter, you could take an air stone that'll give you a much finer bubble so it doesn't disturb the water as much, but it's still lots of air. It's dissolving better. This is an open line, so it's going to be much larger bubbles, and when you see it running, I'll spice in a shot of the 75 long where I've been testing this for 3 months now? I think it's 3 months. Just listening to it, watching it, seeing what it does. You can see how big the bubbles are. Like, here it is over my face, and the bubbles are pretty large, and they do splash the top of the water quite a lot. So you're going to evaporate more water than you would with, say, a sponge filter if you dial it down using an air stone. There's no way to dial this down with an air stone. Now, that being said, I think that one of the positives in the R&D side of things that they can do is diffuse it much better while still keeping that high airflow. And I know Corey and the Ziss people are actually working together to make kind of like the Ziss 2.0, if you will, and improve on some of the things that observations have been seen by Corey as he's used them at the co-op, because they have quite a few of these. I think it's like every tank at the co-op, the actual store itself, has a Ziss filter in it. Or is it Ziss? Ziss? We know it's not that one, but I like Ziss. It sounds cooler to me. I have 3 of them, and I have 2 just to test long-term in a couple of tanks, doing kind of a side-by-side media test to see what the real biocapacity of this filter is. So long-term, that is going to go into what I'm casually calling the testing lab for right now. Would I change out my current filters to Ziss filters? No. No, I would not. Let me explain why. I am that person who cares about not seeing a lot of particulates in my water. I don't need perfect crystal clear water because, obviously you guys have seen, I have a lot of older tanks. Like, this tank behind me is an older glass tank. It's not low iron. It's not ADA. It's not that crazy stuff. But I don't like seeing lots of particulates in my water because it allows me, when I do start seeing things like that or lots of micro air bubbles, it tells me things about the other parameters of my tank. And if I didn't have that clearer water, I might potentially miss something that I look for as far as how the health of my system is. 2, I don't like how tall they are. I don't. You cannot fit this thing into a 10 gallon. You can't fit this into a 20 long. And all of my breeding tanks are basically the height of a 20 long. They're all 12 inches. And this filter on its own, I think, is 11. Or 10. I mean, it's pretty big. So I'd have to have this jammed all the way to the bottom and always have my water at the very maximum level. So if I evaporate, which I do all the time because I'm running dehumidifiers, now this filter is not going to run properly anymore. That's bad news bears. So a sponge, which is only going to take up 3 or 4 inches, maybe 6 for the largest sponges, that profile is significantly lower. And then, you get 2 inches for the little weighted bottom. But in the end, that's all I'm dealing with. I can still do a 50% water change and basically get to the top of most of those sponges, or just barely under the top, and not 2 days of evaporation and this thing no longer has enough water to run at the top. That's the personal thing. I think if you have a lot of 10 gallons, this is not the filter for you. And they are trying to make a smaller version of this. The problem is just this thing has needed a lot of air, and the prototypes thus far, from what I've heard from Corey, need even more than that for the smaller sizes. So they're trying to kind of figure out what the middle ground is and how to get it reliable so that you don't need to have like an entire linear air piston pushing one teeny tiny filter in a 10-gallon tank. For me, it's a no. I like the concept. I like the idea. I like a nice cartridge at the bottom that lets me have a sponge. It's easy to remove and clean. And then some kind of moving bed filter or some kind of more powerful biomedia that is getting pushed through that is pre-filtered by sponge. Now, that being said, if this thing was filled with sponge, I'd probably actually really love this thing. If it was like several of these cartridges that all just like slid together on their own and you could lock a line of them together, right? And it was like, okay, here's my super porous one into my less porous into that. I just had this cartridge system I could work with instead of like pulling an entire filter apart. I'd actually probably really like that, because to me, that would let me like slowly grain out my particulates. And more importantly, I would know I only have to go so far into my filter and clean it regularly, and that I really only very rarely have to clean the last, like the most super fine stuff, or my polishing pads, right? Stuff like that. And it would leave you room to put like ceramic media or something like that if you really needed to. So final thoughts. It's a pretty good air-powered filter. Is it the filter for me? No. Is it the filter for you? It might be. If you're not worried about the couple of things that I'm griping about, if you just want the best possible biocapacity, let's say that like you have guppies, and having all those particulates running around the water column are actually really good for the babies, because that means there's always a little food source floating around for the babies that the adults might ignore, or something like that, just to make sure if they need to hide. This filter actually is probably really good for that case. Now, in my tank, where I breed my guppies, it's powered by an FX6 and it's a giant monster tank. This is really not going to cut the mustard without having a bunch of these things. But I think if you had like a 20 tall or a 29 and you were doing anything that will not predate on its own fry, so that you have lots of tiny fish in with your normal fish, and those particulates are a good food source for them, this filter actually becomes better than a sponge, in my opinion, because you're not letting all that food get sucked up into a sponge. Like, where I would like this thing, if I had a way to kind of block the flow at the top some so it didn't disturb the water too much, would be baby rainbows. Because all that small particulate food that they need to feed off would just keep churning in the water instead of falling to the bottom or getting sucked up into the sponge. And then they would have food sources continuously in the water, and that would be amazing. But most of my tanks are too short for the Ziss to work for now, until there's a different version of it. If there becomes a smaller version of it, I'm going to test it very, very quickly, because that might be the new best thing for how I breed rainbows. Closing thoughts. What I really want to know from you guys, have you tried the Ziss filter? Do you like it? Do you not like it? I'd love to know down in the comments. Does my review make you either never want to see it, you were on the fence? I'm sure most of you guys have seen like 3 or 4 reviews on this already. It's like everybody under the sun has probably tested this. Except for I waited because I wanted months worth of actually working with the product to review it. That's something I do. Like I work as a professional tester for a living, so I don't like to make a judgment on anything without thoroughly vetting what I'm messing with, which for me is about 3 months on the Ziss filter, as well as some let's call it data, but watching the Ziss filter in several other places over time and getting an idea of how it runs in places like at the store at the co-op. Cora Vasask and Joel has had one for a while that he's put in his sump, which is a really cool idea. And some other people have tried them. Like Master Breeder Dean's tried them. Several people inside my club have tried them. I like listening to everybody and kind of seeing if I'm the only one with this story or if it's multiple people. And if it's multiple people, then yeah, it's just how the filter works, as opposed to like, well, maybe it was just mine, right? Because you never know. Let me know. I really want to know if you've used a Ziss filter. Do you like it? Do you not like it? If you've watched a bunch of these reviews, what is it that is the most interesting about the Ziss filter if you haven't bought one yet? Or maybe what is it that makes you say like, no, that's not a product for me? tell me down in the comments. I'd really love to know. Now, if you like reviews like this, you like me going really in-depth and testing some of these products, and just for disclosure, all 3 of the Ziss filters I've bought with my own money. None of them were provided by the co-op. It's all out of pocket. So there's no bias toward this, which obviously I've told you, like, I personally, for my uses, would not use the current iteration of the Ziss filter instead of a sponge. If you like these kind of product reviews, please give me a little thumbs up. Let me know that. If you don't like product reviews and you only want to see, like, beautiful cinematic B-roll with lovely music in the background and never see my smiling face and only see fish, go ahead and hit the thumbs down button twice, just to let me know how much you can't stand this video. For those of you who may be new to my channel, we have 2 different videos every week. Every Wednesday there's going to be a tank of the week where I'll go and I'll feature any one of a number of tanks in my house. Typically it will only be one, but occasionally it might be more than one. And we'll go over really in-depth kind of the fish and the plants in the case of planted tanks. And just let you know exactly what's going on. And when major changes happen to a tank, that's going to come into Tank of the Week now. Saturdays we have things like this: product reviews, plants for profit, more in-depth kind of educational content, tutorials, all that kind of stuff, reviews of products, the kind of things that I love. Like last week, did a thing about what kind of food I feed, all that kind of stuff. So if you enjoy that stuff, consider giving a little subscribe, maybe even hit that notification bell, because that'll tell you about things like the community tab. And a lot of what I choose to do is driven by polls on my community tab. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.